Greetings. Today I'm going to give a political science lesson that is very universal and should be the first thing anyone learns when they think about any type of politics, no matter what country, what religion, whatever. More importantly, it is a way that humanity will have to think about government and the concept of governance as we get into a high-tech age, because many institutions that exist in the world today are failing. They are entirely inadequate for the technological and economic realities of the 2020s and beyond. Now, think of governance as a utility, meaning that it should only be for doing certain infrastructure building and maintaining certain institutions that are considered public sector institutions, such as the judicial system and utilities and other infrastructure projects. Highways, roads, bridges, the electrical grid, the airport system. I'm someone who generally believes that the government should focus on quality rather than quantity, meaning that the government should only do a few things, a list of 8, 10, or 12 things, but do all of those things very well. And instead, what we have in the United States and many other countries in the world is a government that's trying to insert itself into all aspects of life and all aspects of the economy, simply because the people working in government have this innate need to grow government so that they themselves can become more prosperous or powerful. That is one of the natural tendencies of human nature, and government becomes a vehicle for that. And no country is immune to that. And anything not managed by government, those 8 or 12 things that government does, should be handled by the free market system. Now, in the United States, we don't have a political party that is in favor of a small and efficient, productive government, and where the rest of the economy should be in the free market, the private sector making all the decisions and ensuring the productivity gains. We have a political party that pretends to stand for these things, but it never actually stands for these things. It stands for these things until which point, as we get into an argument, and then that pretend political party backs down and surrenders its standing on that point. So that's why we don't have a political party that wants a small, efficient government at all. And infrastructures continue to be built. There was a time when we had no electrical grid, and now we have an electrical grid. And the companies that manage your electrical utility are private companies. They are not part of the government. But of course, the broader infrastructure build-out was with some government backing and consent. The same was true with what used to be the wired telephone system, as well as other aspects of infrastructure. Roads and bridges always comes up as the example. There are many types of advanced infrastructure that can be enabled through coordination of all the world's governments. The International Airline and Airport Management System is actually a big success in that regard. If people from the 1920s and 30s working in this field would believe that today we have this advanced international airline system with airports that coordinate with each other, and the cost of air travel is so low that many people can afford to fly across an ocean to another continent very easily, they would find that as very optimistic. It's a little bit amazing that we have this today, however imperfect the airline travel experience happens to be. So the primary function of government is just to take those infrastructure items that do not disproportionately benefit the wealthy or are disproportionately subsidizing the poor in any way. The wealthy do not use roads or bridges necessarily more than poor people. In fact, there are many working class people whose jobs depend on the roads and bridges because they work in trucking and transportation and so forth. Their job only exists because of this road network that enables a company to ship its finished products via a trucking-based system. So that is the single function of government. It sounds pretty boring, but that's what government should be. It should be boring. Government should not be a mechanism via which people can become famous or become wealthy. It should not be a mechanism that serves as a substitute religion and where people keep track of minutiae on a day-to-day basis regarding their political party versus the opposing political party. And the United States, unfortunately, has many millions of people who spend 8 hours a day on politics. People on the left have been doing that for longer, but people on the so-called right, which is not even really the right at all anymore, as I've explained, they've begun to devolve into that type of obsession and lifestyle where politics is, again, their de facto religion as well. So that is the primary function of government. Now, the secondary function of government, which is important, it should not be zero. This is where a lot of theoretical libertarian types fail, is that once you have a mechanism for absorbing risk and spreading it across all of society so that an individual bears less than the full brunt of any extremely unlucky event that happens to them or some extremely unlucky circumstance they were born into, then you create a more robust society. But then the question becomes, how extensive and how broad should this safety net be? And what does it cost? And who pays for that cost? Almost everyone will agree that a mechanism that smooths out the most lucky events from the luckiest people and takes some of the resources to mitigate the most unlucky events that happen to the most unlucky people is good. Now, it's only a question of how much that safety net should be. Should it be extremely small so that only the luckiest of the lucky 1% have some resources taken from them, where only the unluckiest 1% are net recipients? And since the unluckiest are in fact poorer than the luckiest, obviously, then that pool of resources can service a much greater number of the unluckiest people. But then where does that end? That would be what I described as a small safety net, but then there's always an inclination to make it bigger. Tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich, they say, all the way down to the point where people want to tax anyone who's above them. And tax rates on upper middle class people and even middle class people are quite high. And the safety net, such as it is then far too extensive and is no longer mitigating just the unluckiest events, such as someone being a paraplegic or someone being mentally disabled or something like that. But we're saying that we have to have an entire demographic group on welfare, for example, or that women have it so much worse than men at an immutable level, and including even the wealthiest women, the daughters and wives of the wealthiest men, including that, creates a system, which is what we have in the United States today, where 70 to 80% of all tax payments and government spending is in fact a transfer from men to women in the United States. This becomes far too much in terms of that original valid idea of smoothing out the most extreme events of good luck between the most extreme events of negative luck. That should be done, but then the question becomes, how far should it go? Should it be done only in the most minimal sense, which is generally what I believe, or should it be done to a huge extent to try and create total equality, which has always failed in every country it's ever been tried in? Because you cannot disincentivize the most productive people. They're the ones generating the output before it's even reallocated in the first place. And remember, a safety net should exist only to mitigate the worst luck in society, whether events or whether one was born with extremely bad luck, like the examples I just gave. That's it. That's what politics should be. Why is politics then turned into something that is a combination of reality TV, a substitute religion, a mechanism to become famous, and a mechanism to become wealthy? That ultimately is the big question of our times, because where we stand right now is that technology produces greater and greater output and poverty is dropping worldwide very fast, but a disproportionate share of this output is then captured by nation states, the government, and is used not to improve the human condition, but to create wealth for those that are heavily connected to government. That's why in the United States you have all these industrial complexes, or big, quote unquote, followed by something else. Big tobacco, big pharma, and now big tech. Or the military industrial complex, the healthcare industrial complex, and now even the diversity industrial complex and the feminism industrial complex, and other things that are just another cash grab to create a narrative of oppression so that wealth can be transferred under that guise. That is far, far too extensive of a scope of government, and government should be de-scoped to be, just as I said, should only do 8 or 10 things. The formation and maintenance of infrastructure, a legal and judicial system, and a military. And the legal and judicial system and military should also be strictly monitored so that people in them cannot expand their scope. That's another area where the system in the United States and other countries is failing. In the United States, we have a military-industrial complex that needs to invent demand for new wars so that people who benefit from the military-industrial complex can continue to make a lot of money. The legal system is also expanding into a lot of things where it should not exist in order to create more money for those who are participants in the legal system, lawyers and so forth. The legal system was not involved in things like marriage or immigration to nearly the same extent as it was before, but now by making the regulations and laws such that one requires an attorney and participation in the legal system whenever there is any mishap in any of those areas of life, that is where the legal and judicial systems are creating artificial demand for themselves. Pharmaceuticals are another example of that. The United States has 4% of the world's population, but consumes 60% of the world's pharmaceuticals in terms of dollars spent. That's a really startling statistic because a lot of new diseases are being invented or at least exaggerated, for which you need this extremely expensive pharmaceutical product, which is then paid by your insurance, which means the cost is spread to the entire society, thereby lowering the productivity of the entire economy. But think about what I said. Government should be a utility, and it should be that boring, because then the fame seekers and people seeking a substitute religion will not be attracted to government and politics as their pastime, their profession, their vehicle for their narcissistic or nefarious activities. Government should be a utility. And as a utility, its cost as a percentage of the total economy should be gradually going down. Look at this chart about energy services as a percentage of household income. So even though people think their electricity bill is unusually high or gasoline prices are unusually high in the United States, as a percentage of household income, it has been falling heavily since 1959, as one would expect. This is an exponential decline. It always goes to new all-time lows as a percentage of total household income. Even recent spikes are very small in a historical context. And that is because it functions as a utility, and energy being one of the first principles of nature, you would expect more economic output per unit of energy. And even this chart understates the extent of progress because the type of household electrical devices that existed in 1959 would seem very primitive and frustrating to use by today's standards. The average American household in 1959 had a very primitive refrigerator, a primitive stove, and maybe a toaster. Televisions were still only for the wealthy people and not a truly mainstream product until a few years after that, the early 1960s. So governance as a concept should be experiencing this same type of gradual decline as a percentage of the economy. Under first principles, that's what you would expect. Through the automation of government, which I talk about in other videos, this is also what one would expect because artificial intelligence can replace many of the governance functions that require government employees and other bureaucrats. That, of course, means the amount of money needed to fund governance goes down. And yes, some government employees would lose their jobs, but they would also make more money in the private sector because their income tax is going down and there's a greater abundance of jobs in the private sector, as I write about in my Atom publication, which I encourage all of you to read if you've not read it already. But thinking of government conceptually as a utility is extremely important. And to think about the second mission in terms of smoothing out extremely good luck with extremely bad luck is the way to decide the size of government. This has devolved into, well, tax the rich so that the poor can get more money, and that is something that has gone way too far. Thinking of it as smoothing out the best luck with the worst luck, to some extent, there can be a disagreement about how much good luck should be smoothed out with how much bad luck, but that is a more reasonable debate. It's not the super contentious and tribalistic debate that we have now in the two-party system in the United States as well as in other countries. In fact, the two-party system in the United States has been so corrupted and made toxic by modern technologies that it is destroying democracy in satellite countries as well. My sister comes on Australian television, she lives in Australia, just to explain American politics to the Australian audience because American politics is what is on TV. And the people in Australia don't even pay attention to their local politics anymore because there isn't enough audience scale worldwide for that to be curated into television, whereas U.S. politics, which has become reality TV, for which you can watch 8 hours a day if you want, is something that has swallowed up people's mind share for politics in a country on the other side of the world just because it happens to speak the same language. It's really quite strange. Thinking of government as a utility is something humanity has to do to prevent a much worse and pernicious crisis from occurring as has happened in prior instances in the past. Now, if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.